like we know we're always recorded. So Kodem Kol, I'd like to start with Birkat Kvodo Shel Achsania. The RCA is a pivotal and tremendous organization that I have the zchut to give a shir to. The Rebbeim, I know some people, I know Rabbi Bloch said the retired rabbis, but as we all know, there's no such thing as a retired rabbi. You're going to get shilas, you're going to get people, and Baruch Hashem, your leadership here in Eretz Yisrael is felt. I'd like to kudos to Rabbi Bloch and also say my thanks to Rabbi Bienenfeld and Rabbi Tradbergs, who are both my good friends, and Bezrat Hashem, we should be matzliach. I am going to try, and I'm not sure I'll succeed, which means we'll need a part 2, which is absolutely fine with me, is to cover as much as I can the general subjects of Shemitah, and in each subject we'll try to touch upon numerous practical applications of Shemitah. Kevan shekarva shnata sheva shnata Shemitah. We're getting closer and closer. We're already in Rosh Chodesh. We're already past Rosh Chodesh Elul, which we'll talk about in a second, has to do with Tosefet Shvi'it. So Baruch Hashem, we are coming closer. And like the Gemara says, we all know, Misha tarach be'erev Shabbat, yuchal b'Shabbat. Those who worked hard on Erev Shabbat will eat on Shabbat. The same thing is true regarding Shemitah. The more you make an effort and prepare yourself for Shemitah, the more you'll be able to enjoy this tremendous Shabbat of the land. So before we begin, I want everybody to just get a perspective on the issues that are generally connected to Shemitah. We're going to start with the basic halachic ideas, and then I'm going to go into a source sheet where we will together view the Mikorot. And of course, after every area, I'll open up some room for questioning. The main numerous points, halachic aspects of Shemitah are as follows. There is Tosefet Shemitah, which is basically prior to Shemitah and after Shemitah. There is a halachic idea to add on to the Shemitah. The Mishnayot and the Yerushalmi talks about plowing, not to plow certain areas between someone from Pesach and some from Shavuot, and then there's Tosefet Shvitit after Shemitah. Just like we have Tosefet Shabbat, we have Tosefet Shemitah. There is Isur Sfichin, which is rabbinical. We'll also view Isur Sfichin, which is the produce that grows on its own or was planted on Shemitah that has certain laws regarding the status of that food. That's number 2. Then there's the melachot of Shemitah. Melachot Shvi'it are the actual actions that can be done. Just like we have melachot on Shabbat, we have melachot on Shemitah. What can and what cannot, what usher, what is mutter. And that, of course, comes to our next area, which is plants and gardens. Meaning, how can one run their garden? How can one, properly take care of their garden on Shemitah? What melachot can be done? Are there differences between different types of plants and different types of gardens? And then there's, of course, the famous question, which we will try to, I'm not sure if we'll get into it, but we're going to talk about what's called non-perforated or perforated pots and plants. There's a very common question we get here at the OU, especially those living in Israel with little gardens, and how to deal with that, they call them adanot and pots and planters, and how to deal with that issue. The other issues of Shemitah, after we talked about Tosefet, Sfichid, Melachot, is of course the issue of what to eat on Shemitah. V'chi ma nochal b'shana shvit, says the pasuk. So that's of course the discussion of heter mechira, yevul nochri, and otzar beidin. That's probably the most common and how shall I say, most controversial issue surrounding Shemitah in general. Are those halachic issues, which we'll try to get into. Maybe I'll do it more baal peh. And then, of course, the other 2 issues are the kedushat perot, the holiness of holy Shemitah, the fruits that have certain holiness. They have to be treated holy in certain forms and fashions. And that, of course, comes with the last part, which is basically goes back to the beginning, is just like we have a mitzvah to rest on Shemitah, the land needs to rest, we have a mitzvah to relinquish and forfeit our ownership over the perot shvita. That's called hefker perot. So I'm going to show you a daf mekorot in just a moment, if I can share my screen with everybody. Try to share the screen here for a second, if I can get to it. Okay, can everybody see the screen in front of them? Right. So I'm going to start with, at the moment what I have here is Tosefet Shemitah. We have Sfichin, and we have some Melachot Shvita that I'm going to bring down. We're going to learn together. And then I'm going to try to talk about the other aspects of Shemitah. What I will do is, to make it easier on everyone, I will allow questions after each section. Meaning, when I finish Tosefet Shemitah, if anybody has a question on Tosefet Shemitah, we'll get to it. Everybody has a question about Sfichin, we'll get to Sfichin, and Bezrat Hashem Naaseh v'Natzliach. So the Mishnah in the first parak of Shemitah talks about the Tosefet Shemitah. The entire parak is dedicated to the halachot of what must be done in terms of adding on to Shemitah ahead of time. So if you look at the notes I gave here, the first Mishnah talks about what areas can be nechrash, what can be plowed and taken care of during Shnat Shemitah, and the pasuk finishes with the Mishnah finishes with a machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Shene'emar becharishu vekatzir tishbot, en tzarich lomar charish vekatzir shel shvit, ela charish shel erev shvit. Says the pasuk becharish uvekatzir tishbot, which by the way is learned for Hilchot Shabbos, that we cannot plow or gather fruit during Shnat Shemitah. So says Rabbi Akiva, well, that doesn't need to talk about Shvit, because we already know that Asra and Shvit. How do we know it's Asra and Shvit? Because the in Perek Kaf Hey of Vayikra, we have the pasuk Sadcha lo tizrach, Hamcha lo tizmor, Etzafiach kitzercha lo tivtzor, Vetinvezrach lo tivtzor, Shabbat Shabbaton yela aretz. So then, what's the addition of the pasuk vecharish vechatzir tishbot? Says Rabbi Akiva, ela charish shel erev shvit shu nichnas bashvit. Meaning here Rabbi Akiva, of course, learns that there is the additional halacha of not to plow prior to Shemitah. The Rambam in number 2 it summarizes the halachic significance of what it was in the time of Beit HaMikdash, what it is today, and we'll go through that quickly. Avodat haaretz b'shana shishit. The work of the land in the 6th year, Shloshim Yom Samuch L'Shvit Asra L'Cham Hashem Sinai. We're not allowed to work the land and plow it 30 days prior to Rosh Hashanah, and that's Halacha Hashem Sinai. Lama B'nei mitakna lashvit. It improves and it builds up towards the Shvit. V'davar zeh bezman shebeit Mikdash kayam hu shenesar pi hashmuah. And it only is usher in the time of Beit HaMikdash. Right? V'gazru chachamim shlo yechorshim stei lan. Erev Shvit, Bizman HaMikdash, Ela Ad HaAtzeret, V'Sadeh HaLavan LePesach. So there's 2 types of fields that cannot be plowed, some from Pesach and some from Shavuot. U'Bizman she'en HaMikdash mutarim ba'avodat ha'aretz ad Rosh Hashanah. Kedin Torah, meaning today there is no Tosefet Shemitah, which means you can plow, you can clean up your land, no matter what you need to do, up till Erev Rosh Hashanah. And the question that actually I thought of mentioning to you very quickly, which is an interesting aspect, I thought it was a nice little treat, is that there's a question: is there a connection between Tosefet Shemitah and Tosefet Shabbat? We know the halacha that according to the Ramban, and it's also brought down in the Rishonim, that there is an issue to do Tosefet Shabbat. The Ramban even asks that you have to do it bepeh. There's an inyan on Shabbat that we, some have the minhag that prior to Shabbat we say Ani Mekudel Shabbat and so on and so forth. Pardon? So some don't say, some do say, but the Prishav Melacha is the Tosefet Shabbat. Is there the same halacha regarding Tosefet Shemitah? Is there an issue to maybe have in mind on Erev Rosh Hashanah on Shemitah to distance myself from doing Melacha? So Rav Chaim Kanievsky, based on the Tosfa, I didn't bring it here, wants to compare the two and says that we should, just as we physically don't do labor and make a kind of recess to add on to Shabbat, we should do so with regard to Shemitah. It's not according to all opinions. In fact, Rav Yaakov Ariel here explains that there's a difference. It says, Nira la'afi an yudati, she'agdara shel tosefet shoneh mitosefet Shabbat v'yom kippur. There's a difference between Tosefet Shemitah and Tosefet Shabbat. Shema Tosefet tu b'kamut hazman, Tosefet Shvit tu b'yichud shel mitzvah. Meaning, as the Rambam said in number 1, that it's mitakna lashvi'it, as we saw here, mitakna lashvi'it. It's not an inu of doing some kind of Tosefet. Rather, the whole issue of Tosefet Shemitah is it helps the land during Shemitah and helps the stuff after Shemitah, which you don't want to have basically the Tosefet Shemitah that goes backwards, that it helps the fruit from Shemitah grow even more. So that's the idea of Tosefet Shemitah. In our days, we do not have Tosefet Shemitah. However, there is a certain aspect that still exists regarding Tosefet Shvi'it, and I brought it down. It's a long sugya in Masechet Gitin and the Rambam in Perek Aleph of Yechot Shemitah. I brought Rav Sternbach in number 4, who simply summarizes briefly the issue of where we have Tosefet Shemitah today. Bizman habayit ha'enoheg Tosefet Shvit 30 yom kodem Rosh Hashanah. 30 days before Rosh Hashanah was the mitzvah of Tosefet Shemitah. Me'alacha Moshe Sinai, it's Alacha Moshe Sinai. Aval bizman hazeh, today, mutarim ba'avodat ha'aretz ad Rosh Hashanah. We're allowed to do avodat ha'aretz until Rosh Hashanah. Mikol makom, however, af bizman hazeh, asur midivreihem lintoa ilan ma'achal o lavrich o larkiv. Lavrich ve'larkiv are important halachas you have to know. I'm going to tell you very briefly. Lavrich is the name of riach ha'etz. We take like alei gefen. You have a trunk of a vine tree, a wine vineyard, of course, a gefen of anavim, of grapes, and you pull the geza into the ground in order to sprout another trunk of kfanim, of grapes, for example. That's called havrachan. There's harkava, which I put a branch on a tree in order to sprout another thing. So those are all asur even today. Miyudzayin avahala uvilan srak o shar sichei noyo bezraim shememorla mutar ad Rosh Hashanah. V'yesh machmirim gam bilan srak shlo intoa yudalad yom kodem Rosh Hashanah kadei shelo yetiyeh klita bekarka b'shvit u'v'shita zo asura gam nizrua gimel yamim kodem Rosh Hashanah kadei shelo yeklev b'shvit. I'll explain briefly. There is a Gemara in Masechet Gitin, it's actually Tosefta as well, that says that there is a chashash that we are not allowed to plant anything 45 days before Rosh Hashanah. Why 45 days? Because halacha l'mais, if I have a tree that is a new tree that is planted in the ground, there's a special halacha regarding orla. We all know the halachot of orla. The first 3 years, the fruit is prohibited. So in order for in order to have a year, all it has to do is I have to plant a tree prior to Tu B'Av. If I plant a tree, say on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, so when Rosh Hashanah comes, I already have I have 1 year of Orla. That's 1 year of Orla. So but if I plant any less than Tu B'Av, any day onward is not considered a year. It goes into the next year. Meaning if I plant in Rosh Chodesh Elul, the Orla is a year and those extra days in Elul. So the concern of Chazal was that if we plant a Etz Ma'achal, a fruit tree, on the time after Tu B'Av, when the 3 years will come along, and I did Kerem Ravai, I did the 4th year in Kerem Ravai, I did Neta Ravai or Kerem Ravai, people will say, well, how did you plant those fruits? You must have planted it on the 1st year of Shemitah. It's a Maras Ayin issue. As such, that's the Gzer of the Gemara. The poskim dispute regarding Ilonei Srak. Ilonei Srak, Ilan Srak are trees that do not produce fruit. They produce fruit that's not edible, not fruit. Do those have the same halachot regarding the planting? Is that the same halacha regarding Atzei Pri? So many poskim, the Chazon Ish, for example, felt that the only gzeira, the only halachic concern regarding planting prior to Shemitah is as the Tosefta and the Gemara says, that they were talking about fruit trees. We're concerned about Orla. However, trees that have no fruit, and therefore there's no concern for Orla, there should be no problem to plant them even 3 or 4 days before, but I could plant it on Erev Rosh Hashanah. There should be no halachic issue. So he says here, Sternbach, Lunei Srak, Shas Sichenoi, Bezrim Shenem Orla, Mutar Rosh Hashanah, B'yesh Machmin Gabilan Srak, Shlo Into Yudalad Yom Kodem Rosh Hashanah. This is based on a Shmittah in the Kisei David, and the Rash Misir Loy, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook. They felt that there is, if we go back to the discussion of Tosefet Shemitah, they felt that if the land is working, meaning if I plant something prior to Shemitah, but the effect of the growth continues into Shemitah, I am transgressing an Isser Shene'emar v'shavta ha'aretz. It's a passive halacha that not only do I myself have a prohibition to work the land, but the land can work as an extension of my action. This is, by the way, the opposite of lichora, the opposite of Hilchot Shabbat. In Hilchot Shabbat, there's a machloket Beit Hillel Beit Shammai regarding Shvitat Kelim, right? The Gemara discusses making the ink on Shabbat. So there's no mitzvah of Shvitat Kelim. We don't hold like Beit Shammai, we hold like Beit Hillel. And Shvitat Kelim, meaning I can have my plata work on Shabbat, I can have other things work on Shabbat. The only issue is me, myself, my money, my behemot, my goyim, my ger, my all those things are also on Shabbos. Here in Shemitah, it's different. If the effect of my action on Erev Shemitah causes the land to work, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Kook and the other Rishonim, there is an Isser. There is an Isser of Shavta Haaretz. As such, They hold of the second opinion that we cannot plant a tree 14 days before, because according to Chazal, in a number of Mishnayot and Zra'im, the planting process takes 14 days for the roots to start to be inserted into the land, and that would make it a problem. Regarding Sichim, regarding other plants, so that would be 3 days, because the Hashrasha, the amount of time it takes for stuff to come in is 3 days. That's the now Lemaisa. There are many poskim that are mekel. Vadai, that if a person should try to be hold like the Machmir opinion, but if somebody wanted to plant something very needy for Shemitah, whether it be that they want to have a Kedushat Shvit in their house and they want to have some kind of plant, then there's definitely room to be mekel, and not like the Shita. You can plant like the Chazon Ish all the way before Shemitah. A very interesting discussion, and this has to do with modern day planting. And this is very important for Rabbanim, especially as we're getting very close to Rosh Hashanah. I get questions now left and right. Just like I'm sure all the Rebbeim here know that the hardest question come as you're coming out of the shower on Erev Shabbat and your son's calling you and this guy, and you have to finish the plata and make sure you have your Dvar Torah ready, and then somebody calls and says, oh, I have to go to the hospital, I have this, my food. So the same thing happens on Shemitah. The month before Shemitah, people want to plant trees, they want to make sure they have stuff for the next year. They're not going to be able to plant over the year. So there's discussion in the post-skim, and this is a very important discussion in modern day times, is what's called zri'ah begush afar, meaning how can I plant a tree, a fruit tree on Shemitah, a fruit tree on Erev Shemitah, before Shemitah, in a case where the tree is completely in a what's called they call it a earth ball, or a large amount of a large amount of earth that would not in any way halachically affect the orla. Meaning, for example, let's give an example. I take a fruit tree from a nursery in Yerushalayim, in Hare Yerushalayim, and I ask them to bring me the tree in their tender, in the back of their pickup truck, with a large amount of earth that the tree can continue living. Some say 2 weeks, some say 30 days. They could live there. And I want to plant that tree directly. I open the earth and I directly put it in. So according to certain poskim, it's a real discussion. I mean, this wasn't so posh in the times of Chazal. They didn't have those kinds of questions. They had some, but so the Yeshuot Malko brings a interesting discussion regarding kilayim, and I'm just going to read the beginning. And this is what many poskim, both Rav Rimon brings, Rav Rimon, Rav Rem, and Rav Ariel, and many poskim bring. The Mishpatei Eretz brings it that if I use a tree that has a strong amount of gush afar, I open the area where I'm going to plant it, and I stick the tree directly in with all the afar together in a very fast process, there is no problem, because that does not reset the orla clock, which means that you could still theoretically plant fruit trees up till Erev Rosh Hashanah if they were done in a gush afar. Now, I'm going to read the halakha. I'm going to go over quickly. Be'atzitz nakuv lam li lo sif matayim. He's talking about kilayim. Hagan lo sif nesar da hanechshav ata kizoreya uvezein sarik shumash rasha hagab atzmecha harei shetalash gush afar im zraim deladat rabbeinu nechshav od kimechubar. Meaning the Yeshua Malko brings in an obvious situation. If I take a certain amount of earth and put it together in one shot in the ground and I'm planting it, what I am doing by that is I am directly planting something that basically it's as if I'm taking one and putting in the other. So that's a very, very common halachic shaila now. Within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're coming to Rosh Hashanah. I always recommend people to discuss with the Rav who's competent in these issues, and make sure he's either there or can explain exactly how it needs to be done. Unfortunately, not all people who own nurseries, not all farmers, not all gardeners are Talmidei Chachamim. It's very important to make sure that there's a sufficient amount of earth, that it's not taken out of the earth, that the earth is closed in, and that the area where the tree needs to be planted is dug deep enough that the whole gush afar goes in one shot. And that would be a way to be able to plant it in one shot. Of course, this doesn't make a difference if the tree is 3 years old, 5 years old, 4 years old, 2 years old. Whatever the age of the tree, the orla clock is not resetted. So that's probably those common halachas regarding planting trees. I'm going to open up for questions regarding Tosefet Shemitah, and I want to continue on to Sfichin. I see there's no questions. We can keep going. Okay, so briefly again, what we saw was the Tosefet Shvita. We saw the idea of the Tosefet Shabbat, how it connects. We saw about planting the tree, about planting Atzeinoi, and the option of, yes, question? Okay, the option of planting in a Gush Afar. Now I'd like to move on to Sfichin, which is a very, very also important halachic subject regarding Shemitah. Let's go with the Rambam in Perek Dalid of Hilchot Shemitah. Kol shetotzeh haaretz b'shana shvi'it. Ben min hazera shenofel ba mikodem shvit. Ben min ikarim shniktu mikodem v'chazu v'asu u'shtehem nikrim sfiach. Anything that came out of the land on its own, or that it grew on its own, and then the seeds fell and it grew on its own. Nikrim sfiach, they're called sfiach. Ben me'asavim ha'yarakot shevulam lehem ve'en lem zera hakol mutar la'achol min haTorah. Mideoraita, anything that grows on its own on Shemitah is permitted to eat. Meaning, if I have something that meaning I have a seed that fell on its own from a certain type of a vegetable plant, and it grew on its own, whether it be corn or peppers or tomatoes or whatever it might be, then that is mutar on Shemitah. However, says the Rama, midivei sofrim, sheyu kol asfichim asurim ba'achila. All sfichim, anything that comes up on its own is achila, and that includes also those who plant on their own. Ve'lama gazru alehem b'pnei ovei avera. שלא ילך ויזרע תבואה וקטניות בזירוני גינה בתוך שדה ובסתר, כשיצמח יאכל מהם ויאמר ספיחים הן. לפיכך, excuse me, כל הספיחים אסורים הצורכים בשבית. Meaning, anything that was, the concern of Chazal was that those individuals, Ovrei Aveira, would go ahead and plant on Shemitah and say, oh, it grew on its own. So Chazal assured all sfichim. It's an Isser Derabanan, and that it's Asur. Says the Rambam in Halacha Gimel Halamata. Here we learned she'en ochlin miperot shvit ele perot ailanot ve'asavim she'en zoim otam rov adam kegon ha'pegam ve'arivzin ve'ashotim ve'kol ka'atzeh behem אבל ירקות שדרך רוב בני אדם לזרעם בגנות ובני תבואה וקינית וכל צומח מהם מסור מדבריהם ומלאכתן מכין אותו makas mardus. Says the Rambam, as such, we only eat on Shemitah. This is before Tem Mechira, before Yevul Nechri, before Tzar Beidin. We only eat the fruit, because that has no sfichin. The law is that sfichin does not apply to perennials, rather only annual things, because perennials grow a number of times. So as such, trees and fruit trees have no halachat of sfichin, but grains, vegetables, spices, all those have the halachot of sfichin. And if they were planted on purpose on Shemitah in a Jewish field, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, they have the laws of sfichin and are prohibited. What do we do with the sfichin when we're finished? What do we do with the sfichin when we're finished? So the Mishmeret Shvi'it, I'm going to show you some sfarim that I recommend just looking over when you have a chance. Just quickly, this here at Shmitah Kilchata is Rav Moshe Sternbuch. He writes a new sefer every Shemitah, and he goes back on his halachot. Mishmeret Shvi'it is by Rav Mordechai Karp, a very, very good sefer, a pretty extensive sefer. I'm very happy with it. I recommend also, if you have a chance to look at it, some good sfarim. Says Rav Karp, Sfichei Shvit asurim b'achila. They're prohibited for achila. Ubichlal zeh asur l'achila lebema. You can't give it to your animal. I mean, you can't even have sfichin given to an animal. That's also asur. Ach enem isurei ana. They're not asur ba'ana. Mikom mekon asur l'ishtamesh b'hem l'yizegim b'yadayim. Kon la'ariach b'samim u'prachim u'sfichim u'lasik b'hem l'medura v'chadome. Why did I bring this? The end part is very important. The Chazon Ish, based on numerous Gemaras, I wrote about this in the Torah Tidbits recently, felt that there was no Isser Hana from Sfichin. There's no problem benefiting from Sfichin. However, there's a problem of using it. You can't use them, which means using them for fire and other aspects. This becomes a very common question for the RCA rabbis here regarding products that are sent to Chutz La'aretz. You're going to get questions from your rebbeim overseas, and you can also discuss it, that there are certain products that are produced in Israel from Sfichin that can go to Chutz La'aretz. Now again, every area has to be checked halakha. The OU is now dealing with a situation of I won't give too many details. A special product that is used as an antioxidant in foods, and the antioxidant comes from a certain herb. And we're discussing the question of the herb and antioxidant regarding sfichin, but you have, I'll give you one example. There are certain oils that are used for homeopathic or for natural medicines that are sent overseas, and they come from sfichin. So the question is an Isser Hana. So the halacha would depend on the shimush of these herbs and spices and vegetables. If it's a vegetable that's made to be eaten, and I do a chemical process and make it into some kind of oil that nobody would eat, and it's not its main purpose, that might not be asur because it's not the shimush of sfichin. It's something, it's hana. But if I take, for example, an oil from an herb, and the herb is used for that oil, that might be a question of sfichin, and that we have to be careful about. And there's also the hana of smelling and so on and so forth. 1 second. I see there are some questions recently. Let me just see 1 second. When does Orla begin for the transplant? So I guess I'll ask you some of the questions now. When does Orla begin? I'm going back to the planting. When does Orla begin for the transplanted tree? So if the tree is transplanted directly with the gushafar, there's the Orla just goes on whatever the age of the tree was. Oh, very good. So I see that there's a supervision via Orla. Very, very good. I did not know about that. Seems to be a parallel between our Svigan and which is based on the Seger for COVID based on, okay, fine. If trusted from nurseries with supervision for Shemitah, the Orla count continues. For most cases, though the Orla count restarts upon transplant, this is because the tree sat generally on the surface attached from the ground. That's correct. That's a good point mentioned. Very good about, I appreciate the information we're going to get. Let's go back to Sfichin. So I said there are certain products that might have Sfichin growing on. Now, what's very important to discuss regarding Sfichin is that it's an Isser Derabanan Kechol Davar B'inyan. Now, since Rabbanim here are aware that Bishul Akum, as the Shulchan Aruch, this is the Stam B'yesh, and the Chor, that's the Pshat in the Shulchan Aruch at the end of Siman Kuf Yud Gimel in Yoredeya, that utensils that were used for Bishul Akum are asur, they need to be kashered. The same should be regarding Sfichin. Kalim that were used to cook Sfichin are halachli asur. So let's look at that halacha. I brought here another halacha called Halichot HaShvi'it by Rav Pomerantz. It's a very good book by Oz V'Hadar. So he brings this. He brings the ta'arovet and the halachas regarding Sfichin. Nit'arvu perot hasurim mishum Sfichin beperot sheleter. Perot that were asur Sfichin got mixed with perot sheleter. You had a mix up. Perot here, by the way, is just an expression. It doesn't mean fruit. It means produce. Dinam kechol ta'arovet machlot asurot shasur min b'minoi yavesh berov. You have a halacha in Chulin. It's brought down the Rosh and Siman Lamed Zayin and the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kuftet that min b'mino is batel b'yavesh batel berov chad betrei, like the Gemara says, uvelach meno mino b'shishim. Meaning, just like we have dinei ta'arovet regarding regular isurim, nevela, basar b'chalav, of b'chalav, chicken and milk, all these dinei derabanan. So we have the same laws regarding Sfichin. Sfichin mixed up, it's like a ta'arovet. You have rov, you have all kinds of things. Those exist. Bishel bekli ma'achal ha'asur mishum Sfichin. Nesara kli v'tunagla. Not only is Sfichin asur ba'achila, but if I cooked Sfichin in a kli, the tam from the Sfichin goes to the kli, and the kli is now asur. Nesara kli v'tunagla. The kli needs hagala. Bishel bo ma'achal betoch et le'et, nesara machal. If I put another food in the kli within 24 hours of din ben yomo, like in Siman Kuf Gimel and Siman Tzadik Gimel, if I put in food that's not Sfichin in a kli that had absorbed Sfichin within the last 24 hours, then the machal is asur. It's also b'din Sfichin. It's also asur b'taima tam ki ikar. That's very, very important. There are poskim who disagree. Some say that it's mamish isser derabanan, and you have to wait. You have to be choshesh for natlap, but that's not chashash here. So even if it's cooked afterwards, there's no chashash of natlap. Ki tam nivgam is mutter, and that is that. This definitely becomes a very interesting question regarding the idea of eating at somebody else's house during Shemitah or Heter Mechira. We're going to get into Heter Mechira in a moment. However, just to put it in perspective, if somebody is not makbid on kashrut, and there are certain farmers who do not do Heter Mechira, and there are people who grow in their own houses herbs, spices, sometimes vegetables, and they cook in these kelim are asur. It's as if they cooked bishul akum, they cooked off b'chalav. The halacha stands. I do want to mention, though, and this is important before we get into Heter Mechira, that there are a lot of sfikot regarding sfichin. I didn't bring it here, but the Rambam in Perek Daled Kimdumani discusses that there are certain areas where there are no sfichin. For example, Ole Mitzrayim. I don't know if I have the land to show you here, but I'm going to show everybody a picture. Let's see if you can see the picture here. This is a picture of Eretz Yisrael. So this area here is Ole Bavel, right? This is 3 levels of the Arava Dromit, and this is Ole Mitzrayim. Okay, Ole Mitzrayim is an area of Eretz Yisrael that was conquered by Yoshua Bedino, but was not conquered in Ole Bavel. So Ole Mitzrayim has different halachic standards than Ole Bavel. There's a lot of machloket exactly where. I also might have a better map. There's exactly a machloket exactly where. A better map here somewhere, but I'll find a better map afterwards. There's a discussion where exactly Ole Mitzrayim is, but if it's from Ashkelon west, so there are 2 main machlokot. The main machloket is the status of Ole Mitzrayim. Rav Yisraeli felt that the new kibush of Am Yisrael makes it now like it's Ole Bavel, and it has the same kedusha because the kibush has significance. The other machloket is where is the line? Meaning, some say that the line of Ole Mitzrayim is much thicker. Meaning, I'll give you an example. There are a bunch of kibbutzim and yeshuvim like Alumim and kibbutz Sad, and that area. There are sfekot of certain of the length of where the border ends. Is it closer to Ashkelon or closer to that area? And that's a big nafkamina because according to certain poskim, there are no sfichin. According to the Ram, there's no sfichin Ole Mitzrayim. Most carrots, for example, come from that area. So if there's an area of safek, right before we get to Termicha, there's an area of safek that a person bought. Certain carrots and got it as a present. So there might be many sfekot because there's no sfichin in Ole Mitzrayim. Also, it should be known that at the beginning of Shemitah, this is very important. We're going to talk about this later in our shir. During the beginning of Shemitah, a lot of vegetables are what's called mi'uchsan. They're stored. Of course, you get new vegetables after a number of weeks, but 2 days after Rosh Hashanah, you're most likely you're going to get shishit anyways. So if you're getting carrots that were, by the way, that stay well, they stay well in fridges, you're going to have sfekot of sfichin. So it's important to mention there's also the storage aspect. There's also the sfekot of sfichin in other areas, and also non-Jews. There are a lot of sfekot regarding these issues. I just wanted to discuss the issue of bishul b'kli. There might be room to be makel in certain sfekot, as I'm sure all the rabbanim know. When you have shilas about bishul akum, you had in shul shilas, I'm sure you're mitzaref in certain needs. A big question regarding sfichin is the issue of heter mechira. Heter mechira, I won't get into too much now, but I'm sure you all know Rebbe more or less about it. It was a heter that goes back to Tafresh Mem Tet, which is the 1880s, 1870s, where the poskim allowed Jews in the Yishuv HaChadash in Eretz HaKodesh to sell their land to a non-Jew, and there are a bunch of halachic issues that are involved with it in order to be able to work, grow, and do everything regular on Shemitah. The question is, those who disagree with Heter Mechira, when Jews go and plant potatoes, peppers, cucumbers, spices, so those who say that Heter Mechira doesn't work, what's their time? It's sfichin. You're eating sfichin, which would mean that if I find Heter Mechira doesn't work, then it might be sfichin. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky, in his Sefer Derech HaUmah, number 9, is very machmir. He says that those who hold by Heter Mechira, their kelim are usher. This becomes a very, very sensitive and unfortunate issue. I'm sure you all have dealt with this, that people who will not go eat at other people's houses on Shemitah, not just because of the produce, but they won't even eat the meat because the meat might have been cooked in the kli. They cooked the peppers, or they cooked the potatoes, or they cooked the cholent. Let's look at Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Hamashil kli bishul beperot shvi'it shenesru le'achar biur asfichin hakelim tunim agala. I mean, just like we mentioned before, if you're mashil to somebody clean to somebody who uses usher perot and vegetables, sfichin or beer, they're chayv agala. Lechen mutar lesarev leshilam. You can't even give it to somebody else who knows not makbid because that use it for heter. The elu shesomchim al heter mechira. Let's say I'm getting over here. Elu shesomchim al heter mechira mishtamshim perot sharich leosram. They're using vegetables that might be aser. Mishum zvichin harei kilim shlem osim benoten tam. Meaning, Rav Kanievsky felt that the heter mechira had so much issues that it's zvichin midina, and the kilim should be aser. Many poskim, this is also the opinion of Moshe Sternbach. Many poskim disagree with this perspective, and I'll tell you simply why. We have a klal in the Maharam that if there's a machloket and there's a legitimate machloket, we don't ask the kelim. I'll give you a classic example. I've never seen a Sephardi Jew refuse to eat at an Ashkenazi's house who doesn't have glat meat. I've never seen such a thing. And Rav Yosef is materit. Rav Yosef he's machmir on glat and on chalak. I've never seen a tshuva of a Sephardi Rav that said you can't eat at the ulam, the wedding hall that has hogatzmecha. All these weddings, they make these mahadran meals, right? They say that they bring in other badatzim. I won't get into the politics. They bring in other ashkachas. Why don't the Sephardim say, well, if cooked non-glat yesterday, so maybe I can't eat the kelim at the wedding, because even if you cook my mahadran meat, it's treif. It's pukhazi ma'amach. I've never seen somebody Sephardi go to an Ashkenaz. I can't eat your house because your kelim are balua. By it's a doraisa. According to the Sephardim, the glat non-glat is a doraisa. The Rama also has a shita. But I've never seen such a thing. And the fact that there's a sheet of heter and so on. And there's also many sfichot regarding heter mechira. Because if a non-Jew worked and a Jew didn't work, or the land's not really chayiv in heter mechira because of certain areas in the south, or there's also ta'arut. There are a million reasons. So it's very important to me to get this down clear. You're going to have shalos from your people in Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. We should be vadai mi makpid. The OU is makpid not to use heter mechira. We'll get to that at the other point. Regardless, I think that a person who's makpid not to eat heter mechira, but wants to eat at somebody's house, I don't think there's any reason why he can't have something that's not vegetables. Sarich iyun, what happens you could get to certain questions. What would a Rav say when you have a chicken dish? Okay, a chicken dish that has vegetables, right? That you want the flavor. Now the flavor of the vegetables obviously goes inside the chicken. Better shaila. I think there's definitely room to be makel as well, but it's a very, very good shaila to discuss. I want to add one more aspect on sfichin, and then we're going to go a little bit to melachot shvi'it. There's a very important halachic question regarding the status of otsar beidin in contrast to sfichin. Otsar beidin is brought down in the Tosefta. Maybe we'll discuss it another point more in detail. The Tosefta brings down the story that there were poor people who could not get to the fields in order to properly purchase or remove or take the fruit and vegetables that they were able to take. And that, but Beidin, the Beidin would get a group of workers together that are shlichei Beidin, or emissaries of the Beidin, that would remove the fruit and give it out to the anim. That heter was expanded over the years. That even you could pay them for the work for the transportation and so on and so forth. That's otsar Beidin. However, the issue of otsar beidin is, of course, the fruit and vegetables are tushat shvit. The question is, what is the connection between sfichin and otsar beidin? Meaning, if we have an isser of sfichin, then even if it's otsar beidin, it's tushat shvit. I'm talking about the most common vegetables: potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, cucumbers. If there's an isser beidin sfichin, so I can't use otsar beidin. Meaning, if even according to the Tosefta and according to the postka, you can do otsar beitin. If the vegetables grew on their own or were planted on purpose inadvertently, then even the otsar beitin won't help because the vegetables are aser. Now the question is, at what point are the vegetables called sfichin? That's a very important point. I'm going to try to read it through now in Sefer Mishmeret HaShvit. He summarizes it very well. And we'll try to summarize this. This is important because we're actually very makel on this, and it's very important regarding sfichin. Number Zion. This is Mishmeret HaShvit, source number 10. Maybe we can see my the source sheet. Okay. Yesh chiluk ben tvu'a v'kitniyot liyerek legabei yichus hashanim she'atvu'a v'kitniyot olchim achar hashlish. וכל שהביאו שליש בשישית, אף שתגבו בשביעית מותרים, והביאו שליש בשביעית, עשויים משום ספיחין. There are 3 different types of we have a halacha regarding trumot u'masrot, that at what point does a type of produce mitchayev, becomes obligated in trumot u'masrot. So regarding tvu'ah, which is grains, oats, wheat, barley, they go by shlish. Once there's a third of the gidul on the ground, they're chayiv and masrot. And the same thing regarding sfichin. If I have grains that have a third of growth when Rosh Hashanah enters, then that grain is considered shishit. It's not sfichin, even if it keeps growing. What about vegetables? Aval yirakot b'shitat Rambam hochim achar lekita v'chol shenikletu b'shishit mutarim achim nilketu b'shvi'it la'Rambam asrim mishum sfichin avapi shegidlu b'shishit. Says the Rambam that we know that masrot, the trumot and masrot that we take, goes after likita. It goes after you harvest the vegetables. So according to the Rambam, if I remove the vegetables before Shemitah, there's no sfichin, right? It's the shishit. But if I pick anything on Shemitah, it's sfichin, says the Rambam. So what? How do we have otzar beitin in vegetables? Anything I pick after Rosh Hashanah is sfichin. So there are those who dispute with the Rambam, the Rash. I'm going to skip this paragraph and go back to it afterwards. Here it says the Rambam adds that in nigmar bishlo legam b'shvishit v'lo si b'shvit al pish lektu b'shvit dino kelaka b'shvit mutar v'yeshum dechol shogid lo b'shvishit lo gazu mishum sfichin. Someone is saying the Rambam that if it's not completely grown or grew a little bit, but it's a real shaila. I mean, there are some kuls in the Rambam. L'shitat Ramban v'Arash, Ramban and Rash, the Rash Mishans on the Mishnah. Dechol shetchilat gidulo b'shishit. Everything that started on shishit and grew on shishit. That's what's the smicha. Af shirov gidulo b'shvit v'nikatu b'shvit en bo yisur sfichin. Achi yesh bo ktushat shvit kevan shnilkat b'shvit. Ve'katav hachozon ish t'sfichin d'rabanan yesh lakel b'divim v'chen ha'minhag lakel. The Rash and the Ramban hold something completely different. They felt that if they started to grow in the shishit, even a little bit, that is sufficient in order to not be considered sfichin. I mean, that's the only situation where I can have otzar beitin, is when something grew minimally in shishit. Meaning, now the Chazon Ish has a famous story. I'm not sure it was in Beit Chilkiah or in Kon Miyut, where the Chazon Ish was a kibbutz of Pai, of Poalei Agudat Israel. I'm not sure everybody remembers what Painikim are anymore. There are no more Painikim kibbutzim. Either they became religious Zionists, they became Haredi. So there is the kibbutz Pai were asking Rav the Chazon Ish, whose brother was the head of Pai, what to do for Shemitah, and they told him to plant, very very close to Shemitah, so you have as much produce as possible during Shemitah. That would be Kedushat Shvi'it. And they went after Rosh Hashanah, and they didn't see anything come out of the ground. They were very scared that everything would be sfichin now. The Chazon Ish came down to this kibbutz. I'm not sure it was Komiyut or Beit Chilkiah, one of those areas there. And he counted, and he saw he moved the ground, and he saw 3 little sprouts, and he said, "Oh, that's enough." The Chazon Ish was very, very mekel on this otzar beitin issue, so he felt that we can somech very much on the Rash and the Ramban, and that's how we hold l'maaseh. V'chen yesh yomim l'sfaradim yesh lachmir kerambam. וכן יש מחמים לעצמם כשיטת הרמב"ם, סייעתו שכן כתב המביט, ובפרט שרוב גידולי השביעית שהרבה ראשונים מחמים בזה, כבר נתבאר דעיקר המנהג להקל, וכן יש להורות. Meaning, those who hold by otzar beitin can definitely hold by otzar beitin, even if we're somech on the Rash. That means that even stuff that grew minimally, they started to sprout on Erev Shemitah, on Shishit, they're still be considered not sfichin. There's no isur sfichin, and they're mutter b'achila, and there's no problem. By the way, this also goes back to the sfeikot I mentioned before regarding that you might have a situation where if somebody comes to your house in October, and you're mekel on heter mechira, they use machmir, but you're mekel on heter mechira, you're mekel on certain things otzar beitin, you'll still have a suffix that it's from shishit, so you won't have that isur sfichin anyways. But that's another cheshbon. Regarding, again, I'm going back reviewing what I'm saying, that regarding the idea of sfichin, even if it grew a little bit, that's sufficient to not be considered sfichin. This is also a big question in home gardens. Some people grow spices or vegetables or some things for themselves. So it's very important to make sure that they're not sfichin. They didn't grow on their own or so on and so forth. So we can be somech on the Rash and the Ramban, like many posts can hear, the Chazon Ish as well, that if even a little bit is spread out, so, the plant, even not the vegetable, the plant itself sprouted. You have a pepper plant that you planted recently, and before Rosh Hashanah, it just started to come out. You didn't even see a fruit, didn't see a vegetable, you didn't see anything. You saw a nice little green sprout. That's sufficient not to have the isser of sfichin, and you can eat it. However, of course, the produce is kadosh bikdushat shvit. That's important to mention, and that's how we do regarding the issue of sfichin, and that's how the Otzar Beitin runs. And that's so I want to just quickly review sfichin. We didn't do that much, but the sfichin we talked about the yesod of deoraita and the din derabanan, the mishmeret shvi'it that it's asur ba'achila but not asur ba'ana. The issues we have with certain products that go to chutzat that are made in Israel. That's also important to check out. That there's asur betam. So that's asur betam, and the kalim are asur just like any yisur derabanan. We discussed the derech emun was a little machmir regarding the status of kalim that were used heter mechira. Again, many poskim are makel. Again, even though I'll have to tell a story since we have a moment. Morenu v'Rabbeinu Rav Menachem Genak Shlita, the CEO of the OU, told me that a number of shvitas ago, the LL, I'm sure some are aware that the LL flights that go back to Israel are under the certification of the OU, and certain rabbanim were calling Rav Genak how on Shemitah the flights leave with regular rabbanut dishes, vegetables, meat, and there's heter mechira there. So they asked, how are you allowing your certification to give food that goes back to Eretz Yisrael? There's a problem with the kalim. The kalim might be usher and this and this. So Rav Genak Dafka said, I said, Rosh Shlomo Zalman said, that they're not usher. That's what he told us, that to extend it to the kalim is a big issue. Now, again, I want to add on to that regardless, there are many sfeikot of sfichin and ole mitzrayim, and according to Mebos Ner, they're mutter, and the Sfardim who eat on glatz. So the Maisa pukchaze ma'amach avid, that Am Yisrael, and that even those who are makbid not eat heter mechira, to eat a kalim is I think v'dai halachti. Okay, we saw this discussion of otzar beitin and sfichin. I want to open up now to some questions, and we will continue. Please feel free to either chat, or you can also take out your stuff. Well, I see that people wrote in the chat recently. It was Chafetz Chaim. I heard it was Moshav Netiva. Okay, Seder Gamor. Yefeh. Any other questions? Everyone want to open the microphone, ask a question? Might be better, and we can continue on Melachot Shvit.
Is it okay to plant things indoors?
Oh, so that's another discussion. But I'll open it now, very fast. It's like this regarding indoors. So somebody has some background noise. I can't really talk so well. Oh, that is regarding planting indoors. So there are two extreme shitas, and there's a very common psak halacha regarding Can you hear me now? Can anybody hear me? So I'm going to discuss quickly the issue of planting inside. I think it's important. There's a shita in the Pe'ata Shulchan, Rabbi Yisrael Mishiklov, who based on the Yerushalmi said you can plant in your house. There's no din shmita. Anything that's enclosed with under a roof, there's no dinei shmita. That's the Pe'ata Shulchan. Many poskim did not accept the Pe'ata Shulchan. The Chazon Ish also has a whole chakir. He felt the Pe'ata Shulchan was incorrect. But the Chazon Ish felt that if you plant in a non-perforated planter or pot in a roofed area, there's no din of Shemitah. You can plant, you can water, and there's no din of sfichin. Regarding sfichin, this is important. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach felt that in non-perforated pots that even are outside, there is no din of sfichin. In perforated pots outside, some say there's even a safek because they might have not been gozer that you're going to go plant it on Shemitah, but lemaisa were machmir. But non-perforated plants, even outside, even though it's prohibited to plant and do melacha, betzira and ktsira, there is no halachic obligation of sfichin, Robin. So again, if you're planting inside, it's fine. Even if you were to have non-perforated pots outside, there'd be no sfichin. Meaning, say for example, you have a non-perforated pot that makes a certain spice, and it grew on its own, or you planted it too late. So even though you planted it too late, there's no iser sfichin on it. Meaning, even though it started to grow 2 days after Rosh Hashanah, there's no Isser Sfichin. That's important to know. There's no Isser Sfichin on those things as well. Any other questions? B'simcha, I want to continue on this issue. Please feel free to ask questions. Yes.
Can you hear me? Otzer Bezdin, you're saying, is only on things that started growing before Shemitah?
No,
What
okay,
about if we want to eat vegetables 6 months from now, 9 months from now?
Okay, so it's a very Rabbi Stern, it's a very good question. The answer is as follows. Can you just mute yourself for a second, because the background noise I can't hear. Perfect. So it's like this, Rabbi Stern. Oats are baked in vegetables. The only real way to have them is if they were planted before Shemitah, and they had enough that we'd have vegetables for a number of months. The only other solution, the other solutions are planting it in the south of Israel, where there's no Shemitah, and that even it's a suffix of the Shemitah, so there you can do all kinds of iterim, and that might not have the halach of Sfichin. Or it's if you grow on hydroponic or water, those might be the halacha of vegetables. But the truth is, real, authentic vegetables from Otsar Basin have to come from stuff that was grown or stored. Stored, the difference. Grown right prior to Shemitah. That would be an issel. Yeah, it's impossible to keep water plants alive. Yeah. I'll go back to Shelley's question in a second. Just 1 second, everybody. So Rabbi Stern, the issue is correct that oats are baking 6 months from now becomes very much an issue. For fruit, it's very simple, because the fruit doesn't start to come. The fruit that we're going to see in a moment, the fruit that you're going to take now is from Shishit anyways. In 5 months, it'll be from Shishit. It'll be a 6th year. But the fruit you're going to be fine with. It's the vegetables coming after Hanukkah and other areas where it might be an issue. Again, there's a shaila about Sfichin, when Sfichin finish. But again, it becomes more complicated. Rabbi Stern. The question here: perforated pots, but standing on a plate. So perforated pots that are standing on a plate, if they're standing in your house, is absolutely no problem. Reb Shlomo Zalman, in a number of places, was also mekel. I think that if it's standing on a plate, some say it's better to put a piece of plastic on the plate, because that's not like the Adama plastic or something that's not earthenware, but it would still be okay to. It wouldn't be considered sfichin. Regarding watering it and something, again, perforated pot outside on a plate. If a perforated pot is inside on a plate, there's no Shemitah. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned earlier that there may be some sfichim that are subsequently sent chutz la'aretz and are used in various products and so forth, and they're not edible anymore. That may not be a problem. Now, isn't it a problem to be a daim to make the sfichim unedible and make it so they're no longer a gedil carcass, so to speak?
I don't understand the question. Is it a problem to make them not edible? Is there an isser to destroy sfichin? What's the question?
It should be a daim to destroy.
That's a good question. So it's funny. It's kind of it's the opposite. I mean, I didn't mention this, but when you have sfichin in your garden, if you have sfichin in your garden, the mitzvah is to rip them out and let them rot on themselves. Regarding hurting is sfichin by yadayim, there's a machloket. It's a very good point you're mentioning. Some say that sfichin have kedushat shvi'it, even though they're asur to eat. So it's an asur to do. You're doing what's called hefsed perot shmitah. Mashma in the Chazon Ish and Rosh Langer that there is no issue like that, because Chazal removed sfichin and you can't eat them. Kamhem kedushat shvis. There's no kedushat shvis. As such, when there's no kedushat shvis, then you can destroy them. Meaning, there's no problem destroying it. If there is, let me make it this way: if you could take, let's say theoretically speaking, I can make a product that has sfichin in it, but it's not the regular hana, which is mutter according to any poskim. I would be allowed to do the chemical process to destroy it in order to consume it, because the hana is mutter and the destroying is not usher. Let's go to. I thought there was an Indian if pots are exposed to the sky if you place them outside. So that's something else, Mr. Klein. Regarding moving them on Shemitah is another halacha that I won't get into at the moment, but there is an issue of moving stuff back and forth. Any other questions on Sfichin? Feel free to ask any question on Sfichin, and then we'll try to get into Melachot Shvit. The author of Source 8 is Rabbi Menachem Mendel Pomerantz. He's I know he's it went through Oz V'Adar. It's a very good book. Any other questions? I saw. What about watering an outdoor planter that is not perforated? That also would be okay, but I'll discuss that later. Beseder Gamor. Let's continue on with Melachot Shvi'it. The pasuk says in Vayikra, וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור בהר סיני לאמור, דבר בני ישראל ואמרת להם כי תבוא לארץ אשר אני נותן לכם ושבתה הארץ שבת להשם. 6 שנים תזרע שדיך ו6 שנים תזמור כרמך ואספת תבואתה. והשביעית שבת, ובשנה השביעית שבת שבתון יהיה לארץ, שבת להשם, שדך לא תזרע וכרמך לא תזמור. את צפיח קצך לא תקצור ותדבי זרעך לא תבצור, שנת שבתון יהיה לארץ וכולי. From here, we see that there are 4 melachot on Shemitah. 4 melachot d'oraita on Shemitah. Zri'ah, which is planting, that also includes planting of trees and planting seeds. Zmirah, which is the pruning of the vineyards, the wine, the grape trees. That's called Zmirah. That's also d'oraita on Shabbos. This is Zmirah. Zmirah is a type of planting. Zmirah is planting on grapes because it basically has a new vine come out. You have these little things called eyes. You cut the eyes, and a new grapevine grows. It's like planting, and a grape. I don't think you call it in English. The grapes, those eshkolot, they come out. Then there's ktsira and bitzira. Ktsira is harvesting, whether it be grains, vegetables, or fruit. There's ktsira, and then there's also. A question here? Yeah. Zmira is the pruning grapevines and induced flowering and then fruiting. Yeah, that's what the Zmira is called. Then there's Ktsira, which is the harvesting, and Ktsira is the harvesting, but in terms of in Hebrew, there's expressions in Lashon Kodesh. There are different words expressing harvesting fruit. Misika for zaitin. If you look in Perek Cheskas Abasim, I'm sure you'll one of the first words of Perek Cheskas Abasim Ba'abasra, it gives a whole type of a number of ways of taking fruit and vegetables in different forms. So there are 4 melachot deoraita. Says the Rambam in Halacha Aleph in Perek Aleph, mitzvat aseh lishbot mi'avodat ha'aretz v'avodat einam b'shna shvit shneimar v'shabat shavta la'aretz ha'aretz shabat la'Hashem. ונאמר בחריש בגציות תשבות וכל עושה מלאכה עבודת הארץ או יענות בשנה הזה ביטל מצוות עשה ועובר לא תעשה שנאמר שדך לא תזע וחרמך לא תזמור. There's a mitzvat aseh to be mashbit, to rest your karkar on Shnat Shemitah, and there's a lo ta'aseh if you don't do it, right? And that's what the pasuk says. We have v'shaftar Shabbat la'Hashem v'sadcha lo tizah v'charav tizmor. Eino lokeh min haTorah. You don't have malchus min haTorah ela al zuriya or al azmira al ktsira ve'al ptsira. Only those 4 melachot you receive makot for. We're going to see in a moment that those 4 melachot are deoraita, and the rest is derabanan. The Zmira, says the Rambam, Michlal Zri'ah. Zmira is a type of Zri'ah. B'tzira, Bichlal Ktsira, and B'tzira is Ktsira, the same thing in different produce. Lama pirtana katulu ma'alacha al shtei toldot elu bilvad hu chayav v'al shara toldot shebadat ha'aretz im sha'avot shelo yitpashu minan zeh eno lokeh lehem aval mekim tomatat maldut. Says the Rambam based on the Gemara. We learned more Katan. We're going to come to soon Daf Yomi. That there are 4 melachot deoraita on Shemitah, and everything else is derabanan. However, the 4 melachot are on every type of produce, meaning planting any type of tree and planting any type of seed is asur midoraita midin zri'ah. Any type of harvesting, whether it be removing olives or removing fruit or removing vegetables or removing spices or whatever it might be, that is asur midoraita. Asur midoraita. Everything else, fertilizing, trimming, pruning trees, other stuff are all derabanan, except for one other malacha, which is the machloket. I won't get too much into it. So I'll read the Rambam. What else is mutter? What's mutter? We read in the Gimel everything else is us, or what's mutter? Keitzad, achofer, achoresh, tzorach hakakol, mesakel, mezabel. He fertilizes, he moves the rocks, he digs around it. All this is all the other stuff is derabanan. However, Some say that charisha is deoraita. Digging in the ground is deoraita. Charisha b'zriya b'shvit mishare push me deoraita. Fil man damar choresh b'shvit enoloke modesh afil be'erev shvit 30 yom make isu Torah. This is the Mari. I'm going to read the Mari Kurkus. We don't have that much time, but the Mari Kurkus and the Ritva both say that their opinion that charisha is deoraita. You're digging in the ground; it's also deoraita. Now this becomes a question, and this is it's pashut that it's mutter, but people ask the question. I got to discuss it. Can you build on Shemitah? Can you build a house? Of course you can, but you're digging in the ground. You're doing charisha. It's not a charisha that's tzorach hakarka. I mean, the only charisha that's aser is when the charisha, the plowing you're doing, the digging you're doing, is helping the plant grow better. Charisha is similar to zriyah. I'm helping the plant grow. I'm helping improve the growing of the plant. I'm doing something around it. But if the charisha has no issue, then there's no problem. That would mean that if you wanted to dig in your ground in order to put synthetic grass, this is a question I got 3 times in the last week. You want to put synthetic grass on Shemitah? You don't like your field? You have your guy come out, he digs out. Even if he digs out asavim, he digs out weeds, it's all about mitkaven. And you put in synthetic grass, there's no problem on Shemitah. Because the charisha is not real charisha. That's not charisha. That's why you can put sewage on Shemitah. You can put pipes on Shemitah. You can build a pool on Shemitah. Because the charisha, there's no avoda there. It's a davar nikar. Some say that if you want to uproot something, you should show some kind of heker. But I'm going to get into it. But I'm saying in general, charisha is important to know. Okay. I want to get to a very important halacha, and this is very, very important in Yesod that they can learn this, and we're going to halacha lamaiseh for many people who have gardens, and this also has to do with a lot with heter mechira and otzar beitin. There are 2 types of milachot that are asar in Shemitah midoraita: harvesting the fruit and planting the fruit, right? Whether it be pruning the grapevines or harvesting food. However, we know that we have to eat on Shemitah, right? We can take how are we going to take food if we can't? You're not supposed to starve on Shemitah. It's not the halacha you're supposed to starve. So how do you remove the fruit and vegetables if there's an issur of harvesting? So the Gemara says asur kederach habutzrim. You can't collect a large amount. We're going to see at the end the Rambam in a moment. At the end of our limud, there's taking a large amount. There's keeping it in your house. That's called shamur v'ne'evad. But of course you can remove for eating. That's no question. The question is harvesting and picking the fruit the same exact halacha as planting and pruning? Okay, so let me just. I'm going to give you the outline. You're going to see in the Makor in a second. There's no question that planting and pruning are usher on a certain time. They're usher from Rosh Hashanah on when Yontiv comes in. There's 2 isurim. You're usher also for Yontiv, also for Shemitah, and it ends on Erev Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Bet. That's the last time. Harvesting, however, the question is the halacha of harvesting also on Perot Shishit? Meaning, is there an issur of harvesting? Not just is it only harvesting on Shemitah, or is there also an issur to harvest fruit that came in before Shemitah? Meaning, we have halacha that fruit that looks like that became fruit before Shemitah, they don't have the halacha of Shemitah. They're mutter. There's no sfichin. There's no kedusha. There's gunished. Gunished. Is there a halacha of harvesting too much or selling it? Is there a halacha of these fruit? Now, same thing the other side. What about perot shvi'it that go into Shemitah? That go into Shminit. By the way, people have to realize. I always say this. The biggest misconception about Shemitah is that it's not a full year. Anybody here will tell us Shabbos. It's only 25 hours. What are you talking? No, my friend. Shabbos is cooking on Thursday. It's cleaning on Friday. It's getting the drasha ready. Shabbos is your whole week. Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. So just like Shabbos is 4 or 5 days, Shemitah, you see, when people are getting ready months before Shemitah. And there's also Shemitah after Shemitah. There's Biur after Shemitah. There's Kedushat Shvit after Shemitah. Shemitah it's a 3-year process. 3-year process. I'm not in the least bit of exaggeration. It's a 3-year process. I told the rabbis in America that we have to be concerned of Perot Shvit in Chutz La'aretz after Shemitah, even worse than Shemitah, because that's the leftover stuff. So the question is, when are the Isser of Betzira and Ktsira Mutter and Asr? So the Minchat Chinuch says, in number 15, V'lavin elu einam b'shnat hashmita dafka. They're not on shmita dafka. Ela talui begidulei shvit. Ma shegadal kodem shvit ki kol echad lemi mashu chanita shlish shiuro mutar liktzor af b'shvit. You're allowed to kotzer even b'shvit. Meaning, says the Minchas Chinuch Meforash that you have gardens, you have fruit trees, you have fruits now. You're gonna get. I don't know what fruits they sell in the summer. Maybe Mr. Klein can help me. The fruits they go in the summer. What's going to happen is anything that comes into your supermarket in October, in November, maybe December, aren't going to be Shemitah because they're going to be Pirot Shishit. And there's no issur of picking them and harvesting them kederach babotzim, kederach hakotzrim, because they're Pirot Shishit. They're not Pirot Shvit. Uma shegadal b'shvit, af le'achar shvit, asur liktzor litzor v'nukal v'nila. But where does it come into play? There's a flip side to this. There's a contra, that if you have fruit that started to grow during Shemitah and grew into Motzei Shemitah, Shminit, you still have an issur of tzir and tzir. That means heter mechira, yuval nocher tzar beitin. All this stuff comes into play after Shemitah also. This is the halach. So again, we have Zmira and Zriya. The planting is a set time, Erev Rosh Hashanah to Erev Rosh Hashanah. Or Rosh Hashanah to Erev Rosh Hashanah, but the B'tzira and K'tzira, you can collect the fruits in your gardens, in the supermarket, whatever it might be. I'm sorry, you can gather them on Shemitah if they're holding Dushat Shvit. If they're holding Dushat Shvit, but only a certain amount. Regarding Perot Shishit, the fruit of the 6th year, you can do whatever you want, even though we have Shemitah, and Shemitah has begun. We have the Shemitah b'poyal. It still doesn't make a difference. The payrot are still connected to the year before, and there's no issur of tzir and tzira. However, on Motzei Shemitah, you have a shell. So to summarize, the malachas of b'tzira and k'tzira of harvesting are on the fruit of Shemitah, whether on Shemitah or after Shemitah, and the malacha of Zuriya and Znira are on the earth. So that's how I like to summarize it. The Sefer Shemitah, Rav Yichel Michal Tikachinsky, wrote a terrific book on Shemitah. I happen to like it very much. He summarized. If you want a short book on Shemitah, it's a very lovely. It's actually very, very small, and he explains the whole process of Heter Mechir, what happened, and it's beautiful. He has these lovely little footnotes where he talks to Gedolei Torah, like Rav Chaim Berlin and Rav Yucham Diskin, and you saw he was so involved. He'd go like Dolim. So he talks about this issue, and he disagrees with the Minchas Chinuch. He brings it out. He brings opinion. Lichora, look at number 16. Lichora harezim atmiya. Halu mefurash amu b'shak tzira b'tzira hina avodat ha'adama o ailan kedei Rambam Moshe kotzer avodat haaretz v'chen dasvot Rosh Hashanah aval achrosh liktzor la'idor לדבר תלוי בעבודת הארץ. כן, מה שיושלמי, שפר חומן הם קמים, אם פירות שישית אפילו בארץ מותר, ואם פירות שביעית יצאו למוצאי שביעית לחרוש מותר לאסור, משמע פירות שיצאו למוצאי שביעית פריך שיהיה מותר, ואולי בשישית פריך שיהיה מותר רק לתלוש. יש מאמינים שקצירה עם עבודת הקרקע. Says Rav Tikachinsky, how can you say such a thing? You cannot gather in a normal fashion the fruit of shishit. You can't go and gather them and sell them in the stores in that way. You're working the land. I don't look at Shemitah just as it's not like I said before, according to Rav Tikachinsky, according to Havamina Rav Tikachinsky. It's not just an avoda. It's not just an avoda on the fruit. It's an avoda on the land. It's an avoda on the land, which means that if you're picking the fruit in a fashion that is prohibited on Shemitah, what you are doing, even though they're poaching, you're still over on an Isser. It's a good halachic shayla. What do we do? So the Chazon Ish disagrees. Tapuzim shel shishit, oranges of shishit. Hanichnasim lashvit, dazlinan batar chanita. We go after chanita, which is a whole other halachic musag. I'll read to you in a moment. Mutarim lekatfan. You can take them as much as you want b'shvit. Bli shum shinui. There's no problem. She'en lo ta'aseh kederech hakotzrim. There's no isser lo ta'aseh hakotzrim. Ela beperot sh'nitchayev lafkiran. That you have whenever there's a chiyuv of the hefker peiros, the hefker, there's the chiyuv of the ktsira and tsira. Mishum the mixei ken agub balut nagubo. Min the Chazon Ish says explicitly, no, perot shishit have no. There's no kedusha in perot shishit. There's no isser shavur v'neva. There's no problem. So you're going to come into your supermarkets in November, December, in October, November, maybe even more, and you won't have problems with these issues. So there's a lot of course, halach and b'makbid. There's some ways where it's not an issue, simply not an issue. You won't have shalos. I'm talking about if you're makbid on heter mechil like the OU is, it's you have to be you have to know this, and that's what Rav Tikachinsky finishes off. Then even though there's avodat haaretz im kozeh muteret mishum shebat bemet haksiva b'tzira kishila atzma ina asura. It's a big chiddush, Rav Tikachinsky. It's not asur. It's not really asur. It's not a malacha. You can't eat if you can't harvest. Rabbi said we're not supposed to tarv on Shemitah. You have to. The reason why it's usher is because of hefker. The first food tree that we'll have. Thank you, Rabbi. Shkoyach. That's the January. You might have something in December. I have a Shemitah calendar. I'll try to show you, and there you can see it. I think there is something in December, but I'm not sure. So again, says Rav Tikachinsky that it's not a malacha. It says you can't eat. The reason why the Torah asered b'tzira kederech kol haaretz kederech habutrim is to show that it's not hefker. When you're collecting the fruit in the regular fashion, you're not showing that it belongs kila Hashem haaretz umloah. You're not showing the issue of hefker. That's why it's aser. כדברי הרמב"ם בספר המצוות לא תעשה ושכבים בחינוך וכל זה שייך בספיחי שביעית אף שהם ספיחים מותרים הראו בקריאת שמע והפקר ופירות שביעית שאין להם קדושת שביעית אינם הפקר. So the haskama, the universal agreement of the poskim, the Chazish of Tishkinsky, the Kol poskim, that there is no isser of collecting and there's no kedushat shvit whatsoever in perot shishit. The zmira and zriya are aser, but the ksira and tzira, it depends. Now, on the other hand, you have to be careful that if you have fruit that came in, I know we're talking way ahead of time, but if you have fruit and vegetables, fruits that go into Shana Shmit, you also have a question of that issue. However, I just wanted to mention that there's a little bit of a kashya on that Rav Tikachinsky. Just look at this Rambam. Mori v'Rabbi Hagon, Reb Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, Zecher Tzodik U'Kodesh Livrocha, used to use this Rambam as a kashya. The Rambam says, "V'zeh shneimar tzefich ketzircha lo tiktzor." Shelo yiktzor. One second. Shelo yiktzor kederech shekotzer kol shana. You shouldn't kotzer like you do all year. V'im katzar kederech hakotzrim loke. If you do kederech hakotzrim, there's malchus. Gon shekatzar l'chol hasadeh. He as if he collected all the in one shot. Or shekatzar la'avodat haaretz ko shebi'arnu. So he says, what? So Reb Zalman Nechemia said, "What shekotzer la'avodat haaretz?" Sorry, one second. What's kotzer la'avodat haaretz? Meaning there are two types. There's collecting for yourself, and there's collecting la'avodat haaretz. So the Reb Zalman Nechemia, kasha there, but we won't get into it. Just quickly regarding this, I want to explain to you how we do what is considered chanita. For vegetables and grains, we already explained regarding sfichin that it's either a shlish. One second in the chat. Early January. Can you publish Rabbi Kalter? Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to have a OU Israel guide on kashrut, which will have a whole section on Shemitah. And I have there a calendar I've worked on, so I'll be happy to get it to everyone. Maybe Rabbi Bienenfeld could help me collect names and emails, and I'll try to get them the guide, which will come out bli neder. I'm not sure it'll come for Rosh Hashanah, but it'll come out very soon. Blueberries are also b'seder shakoyach. What is chanita? Meaning by imported from South America. Regarding when is the time that become kedushat shvit? So we said that by grains, just like sfichin, it's by the third, and vegetables it's likita. So even though we're not, there's no isser sfichin. There's once you pull them off, that's important to say. The sfichin, once you pull them off, they're still holy with kedushat shvit. What about what's chanita? When do the fruits start? When do the fruits start? I'm explaining this because we explained that perot shishit do not have the halachic obligations of betzira and ktsira kederech hakotzrim u'kederech habotrim. So there's a sefer Mishpatei Eretz, another terrific sefer written by Rav Efrati's Beit Midrash, a very big Talmud Chacham named Rav Rochenberg. By Rav Rochenberg, right? Rav Shaul Rochenberg. This is the new version of it. I very much recommend it. It has very good footnotes from the poskim. It's like a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. If you want, there's also an older version. It's not on Otzar Chochem, but it's a very, very good book. Very, very good book, and it's used a lot by poskim. So he writes, Peirot ha'ilan shechantu b'shnat hashmitah. Peirot ilan shechantu b'shnat hashmitah k'tushim b'k'tushat haaretz. They're holy with Dushat Haaretz. What is Chanita? Two opinions. Opinion number one, Yeshu Mushuslav ani krab l'shon ha'mishnah unata masrot. U'v'shlav zeh samuch l'shlish gidul. That only when a third of the fruit is really there, then it's chayev. Yeshu omim shitchilat gidul apri la'achani v'taperach shekvar nikar pri. That Reb Shlomo Zalman used to say the second opinion means that we mamish start to see a fruit. Most poskim are machmir like the second shita, and that we should make sure that Chanita is when the fruit starts to come. But anything that had that when Shemitah comes in does not have the issue of Ktushat Haaretz. Shaul Reichenberg. Thank you, Rabbi Klein. Any questions? I see we're not going to get into everything, but at least I got some stuff. We talked about Psira and Ktsira. We talked about Perot Shit and Perot. One second, Perot Shit, Perot Shvi'it. There's the Melachot, Doraita 4. Any other questions on this area that we discussed?
Just a side issue that you didn't get to. Yibul Nochri, what is the position of the OU?
Yibul Nochri does not have Kedushat Shvit. There's a very... Close your mic for a second, Mr. Rabbi Stern.
Yes.
Thank you. So the OU does not give certification to Ter Mechira. We very much prefer the Otzar Beitin perspective. I wish I could get into it more, but I see I don't have that much time. There are many options of Otzar Beitin, whether in Bnei Brak, there's also through, the OU, there are certain vegetables definitely through Otzar Haaretz. Yivul Nochri, like the mainstream actually, the poskim that it doesn't have Kedushat Shvi'it, and there's no problem regarding Shemitah. However, there are another Ashkafic perspectives of giving Parnasa being lo techonem. The question is we would prefer to find solutions that would help us not need to purchase both Yivul Nochri and a Ter Mechira. And that means Yivul Shishit, it means Aravat Tromit, it means perhaps Yivul Chul, and that would be the option. Bezrat Hashem, I'm going to speak to Rabbi Binavad. I'm so sorry that our time is running out, but I got too much into it. Maybe we'll have a part 2 and a part 3. If everybody's happy, I'd be happy to discuss. Maybe we'll do the next part, Hefker Perot and Kedushat Shvit, and we'll do beer. But if there are any more questions, please, I have comments for more questions. Rabbi Bloch.
Yes, no, I appreciate what you've done, and I know that you want to get to Mincha. So what I would recommend is that we end now. Rabbi Bienenfeld will speak to Rabbi Friedman about a part 2. And if you could send us an email, we could allow those who have been on this program to contact you. Okay, even though we didn't make a list, interesting. I did not have people register, so we don't know who was on the program. But we could put into the ad that would be for part 2 a listing of how to contact you with questions. Okay, okay. I really appreciate the time you've given us. Yes, Kayak, it's phenomenal, and really, I think many of us would love to have another opportunity to continue this.
I want to thank everybody. You know, it's hard to be able to speak to some Rabbanim and do a little bit of lumdis is so much fun. So I have to thank you all for giving.
I'm glad, and we truly enjoyed the fact that it wasn't just this is the halacha. Here's the lumdis, here's the machlokas, and it's absolutely fantastic. We really, it was very enjoyable. Perfect on the spot as to what we needed. Okay, so I'm going to thank everyone very much. I'm going to close out the program now.
How can the recording be found?
Okay, so I will speak to I did record it on a cloud. I assume they're going to send me the information, and when we put together the next session, by then we will have a link for you for the first session. Okay, and I'll just figure out some other ways of getting the information out Okay?
Also the Myra McCullough?
Certainly, if you're on the RCA Israel mailing list, you will get information from us. Okay? Okay, very good. Okay, thank you very
All too.
much. Kol tov.